Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are looking at something that feels like a truly foundational shift in global engagement.
Oh, absolutely. It's a moment that is, it's reshaping the entire geopolitical landscape right before our eyes.
And we're talking, of course, about the January 7th, 2026 presidential memorandum, the one directing the immediate withdrawal of the United States from 66 international organizations.
It's an unprecedented scale. When you decide to pull back from 66 different bodies all at once.
And it's what, 35 non-UN and 31 UN entities?
Exactly. You're not just making a budget cut at that point. You are signaling a total and very rapid reevaluation of the entire post-World War II multilateral order.
And that's really the core of our mission today. We want to unpack this memo for you, the listener, to give you an unbiased, really detailed analysis of the rationale, the sheer scope of it all, and critically, the immediate geopolitical fallout.
Right. What does it actually mean for global governance, for allies, especially in Europe, and for the stability of international agreements moving forward?
We're going to try and cut through the noise by relying on the official White House fact sheet, but we're also balancing that against analysis from domestic media, the scientific community, and international outlets.
Like the European Council on Foreign Relations, which has had a lot to say.
Okay, let's unpack this monumental decision.
Let's do it.
So let's ground this conversation in the specifics. The presidential memorandum, signed January 7th, 2026. It came after a review that the administration started. When was it? Earlier in 2025.
That's right. And the core justification they put forward, well, it really operates on two main levels.
Okay.
Administratively, the claim is that these 66 entities no longer serve U.S. national interests, security, economic prosperity, or, and this is a key word for them, sovereignty.
And so the stated goal is, what, just to stop the funding?
It's to eliminate American taxpayer funding and involvement, yes. But specifically in organizations the administration says are inefficient or ineffective and here's that key ideological point, organizations that advance what they call globalist agendas.
So it's a two-pronged attack. It's about money, but it's also about ideology.
Precisely. The administration's messaging is consistently about restoring American sovereignty. They assert that a lot of these bodies promote things like, and I'm quoting here, radical climate policies, global governance, and ideological programs that conflict with U.S. economic strength.
And on the financial side, it's a very clear America first framing.
Completely. The idea is, by exiting these bodies, the resources that went to international cooperation can be redirected to domestic priorities.
Things like infrastructure, military readiness, border security.
Right. It's presented as a kind of zero-sum game. A dollar spent on multilateralism is a dollar not spent at home.
And you mentioned this earlier, but it's important to stress this wasn't a bolt from the blue.
Not at all. It's the culmination of a very clear pattern. The White House fact sheet even points to it. Think about it. We saw the immediate start of withdrawal from the World Health Organization and the Paris Climate Agreement when the administration returned to office.
Right. And then there was the notification to the OECD on the global tax deal, pulling out of the UN Human Rights Council, defunding UNRWA. This move, taking out 66 organizations, feels like the final definitive step in a long-term strategy.
Exactly. It's a systematic dismantling. And what's really fascinating here, to really grasp the meaning, you can't just stop at the number 66.
You have to look at who was on the list.
You have to look at the specific organizations targeted. That's what reveals the ideological priorities under the surface of the budgetary claims.
Okay, so let's dig into those targets. What are the big names that really signal what the drivers are here, especially on climate and social issues?
Well, the analysis highlights several huge ones, organizations that are central to global science. We're talking about the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC.
Which is the body that hosts the big annual COP-piece, the climate conferences.
The very same. Then you have the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. And very significantly, the India-led International Solar Alliance.
Can you just clarify for our listeners, why are the IPCC and UNFCCC so central? Why is leaving them a bigger deal than, say, defunding a smaller environmental research group?
It's a great question. The IPCC is the body that synthesizes global scientific consensus. It doesn't do its own research. It reviews and summarizes the world's most critical climate science to give risk assessments to governments.
All governments, including the U.S.
Exactly. So by withdrawing, the administration is essentially cutting off the U.S. from this centralized, internationally vetted knowledge base. Now they have to rely only on their own domestic assessments.
And the UNFCCC.
That's the actual diplomatic and legal mechanism. Exiting it isn't just about refusing to join future deals. It's about walking away from the entire foundational treaty structure. A treaty, I should add, that the U.S. Senate previously ratified.
Wow. Okay, so targeting those specific groups makes it really clear this isn't just about waste or inefficiency.
It's a fundamental disagreement with the mission. That's the core of it. The administration calls these organizations captured by globalist agendas.
Not just redundant or wasteful.
No, the language is much stronger. The sources are specific. They point to the administration's opposition to things like DEI mandates, gender equity campaigns, and what they call climate orthodoxy.
So it's basically taking domestic culture wars and prosecuting them on the international stage through foreign policy.
That is a very good way to put it. It shifts the argument entirely.
But couldn't the administration argue that this is actually a more efficient way to operate? That they can just fund domestic research directly or do bilateral aid deals without all the multilateral bureaucracy?
And that is exactly the argument they're making, that they can get more bang for their buck by cutting out the middleman.
But what's the counter to that?
The international analysis points out that these multilateral organizations, they provide a unique convening power and standardized data, like that IPCC data we mentioned, that is almost impossible to replicate on your own.
So the cost of just trying to gather and synthesize that same data yourself could end up being more than you saved.
It very well could.
This is where it gets really important. Let's move past the administration's press release for a moment and look at the actual reactions. How did this move land, both at home and abroad? And we need to stay strictly neutral here, just present the spectrum.
Of course. Starting with domestic support, the move was really framed as a necessary restoration of American strength.
Okay.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio defended it immediately. He said the U.S. is rejecting the, quote, discredited fantasy of global governance. And he talked about dismantling the multilateral NGO-plex.
Strong words. And conservative allies, like the think tanks.
They saw it as a huge victory. The Heritage Foundation, for example, called it the institutionalization of Trumpism. They argued it's a necessary step to defund bodies they've seen as hostile to U.S. and Israeli interests for a long, long time.
And then there's the new Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE.
Right, championed by people like Elon Musk. Their view connects these withdrawals directly to other big moves, like the reported closure of USA. For them, it's all part of a broader, aggressive push to eliminate what they call criminal waste in global aid.
Okay, so that's the supportive side. What about the domestic criticism?
It was immediate. And it was just as fierce. The scientific community especially felt it was a direct attack on evidence-based policymaking.
I can imagine.
The Union of Concerned Scientists called the withdrawal a new low and flat-out anti-science. One of their scientists, Dr. Rachel Cletus, warned that leaving the IPCC is like voluntarily blinding the nation.
Because these risk assessments are used for so many practical things.
Everything from coastal defense planning to crop insurance programs. You're basically deciding to plan for the future without looking at the world's most comprehensive data.
And how did mainstream media frame it?
Outlets like the AP and PBS generally called it a sweeping retreat. They framed it as an action that isolates the U.S. and crystallizes a kind of my way or the highway approach to global cooperation.
Which former officials probably echoed.
They did. We have a specific quote from former climate advisor Gina McCarthy. She called the decision short-sighted, embarrassing, and foolish, and warned the U.S. is just ceding global leadership.
Now let's pivot internationally, because that's where you start to see the vacuum forming in real time.
Yes. The reaction from the targeted organizations themselves was, as you'd expect, one of deep disappointment. The Director General of UNESCO, Audrey Azoulay, expressed deep regret, saying it harms global collaboration in science and education.
And what about the impact on specific initiatives like that Solar Alliance you mentioned?
That's a really interesting indicator. Indian media focused heavily on the U.S. exit from the India-led International Solar Alliance, the ISA.
Why was that one so significant?
Because the ISA was seen as a really successful model of cooperation, uniting developed and developing nations around clean energy. The U.S. exit is seen in Delhi as more than just a loss of funding. It's a symbolic rejection of that whole collaborative model.
And that brings us to Europe. The European Council on Foreign Relations, the ECFR, put out an analysis.
And their observation is critical. They basically say that European allies now have to figure out how to fill the America-sized hole in global governance.
Especially in areas the U.S. just walked away from.
Exactly. Climate, pandemic preparedness, global health funding. The ECFR sees this as a direct mandate for the EU to step up and backfill that gap. For Europe, this isn't an abstract debate. It means they have to absorb costs and take on diplomatic work the U.S. used to handle.
So if we connect all these dots, if we look at the bigger picture, this is where we can really synthesize what these 66 withdrawals actually represent.
And the objective conclusion from so many sources is that this is not just a budget maneuver. It's a systemic pivot to what analysts are now definitively calling strict unilateralism.
With the clearest signal being that withdrawal from the UNFCCC.
That's the legal linchpin. Remember, the UNFCCC isn't just some agreement, it's a Senate-ratified treaty. By walking away from something with that level of legal standing, the administration is signaling that it no longer recognizes the basic legitimacy of the post-WWII multilateral system if that system conflicts with America First priorities.
That sets a radical precedent.
It really does, and the fallout for climate governance is just undeniable. Exiting the UNFCCC and the IPCC at the same time, that definitively ends any pretense of U.S. climate leadership on the world stage.
And that vacuum will be filled.
It's already happening. You'll see rivals like China, who are eager for more diplomatic influence, step up. Or, as the ECFR noted, allies like the European Union will use this as their moment to become the default global leader on climate.
It's also really important to note the connection the sources make between these diplomatic retreats and other more assertive actions.
Yes, the timing is critical. These withdrawals happened alongside news of, quote, aggressive military moves in Venezuela and territorial interests in Greenland.
And that pairing is very telling.
Highly suggestive. You're abandoning soft power tools, diplomacy, aid, consensus building, while simultaneously flexing hard power. It points to a purely transactional foreign policy where bilateral leverage is everything.
And finally, it all comes back to that internal ideological critique. The objective conclusion seems to be that foreign policy is now an explicit extension of domestic culture wars.
Right. The goal is to purge what the administration sees as woke or DEI influences from U.S. policy, and just as importantly, from its funding streams. It's a total realignment of what U.S. foreign policy is even for.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Well, the U.S. has pulled off a massive withdrawal from 66 organizations. It's solidifying a direct conflict between America First priorities and the entire multilateral system we've known. This retreat signals a fundamental shift for every nation that has historically looked to the U.S. as an anchor of global stability.
And that raises a really important question for you to think about as the world adjusts to this. If a U.S. administration can so quickly and easily exit a major Senate-ratified treaty like the UNFCCC, what assurance does that give any one ally or rival about the long-term reliability of any future U.S. commitment or treaty? The very stability of international agreements themselves is now in question.
Something to think about as this new era of strict unilateralism unfolds. Thank you for joining us for the Deep Dive.